morning, everybody. A very good morning, and welcome back. It's lovely to have you with us for another webinar in the export recovery series. Here we are, exporters trying to find our way forwards in post-COVID New Zealand to try to find pockets of new prosperity for ourselves, our businesses, our communities, and of course for our country. Today, absolutely delighted to be joined again with one of our panelists who's come back not just once, not just twice, but actually 3 times. He's a glutton for punishment, but the reason we've got him back is because he's one of New Zealand's most preeminent digital leaders, a champion of e-commerce and an evangelist for everything about global growth in direct-to-consumer digital. Paul Pritchard from Overdose Digital, a very warm welcome to you. How are you, man?
Thank you, and I feel like I have to live up to something now, so let's let the show roll on.
I reckon if we go for a more energetic introduction, then we're going to set the bar really high. It's like, really appreciate your time today. It's like you've got your hands full. I believe you're opening another office in another country. What's the number up today, Paul? 7 or 8 different countries that you're operating in?
Yeah, so as of August 1st, we'll be in 8 countries, and as a business that's looking actively to expand globally and understand the markets that are relevant for us, to be doing this at this time has been both a challenge and a huge opportunity, and something that we've really wanted to accelerate into and make the most of this time. Hitting the markets that we're in now versus the ones that we want to open up to as well has been, I guess, pretty insightful in terms of how the brands that we work with and the customers that the clients that we support and partner with, how they can view that world, that those new markets as well, has been quite relevant. And the conversations we're having today are very much different to what we were having 5 months ago. Absolutely.
So this is like running a service industry through a time when you can't travel, you can't contact people, you can't shake hands. Again, there's been themes of the challenges of proximity all the way through this journey that we've been on together. But from a big service business that's been run from New Zealand, what's been particularly challenging about getting through this when you can't connect and you can't travel?
Oh, I think that's such a really good point, right? Before the pandemic hit, we were traveling a lot. We were in on planes more often than not in some months. And the purpose of that was to be face to face, was to interact with people and get the whole picture, right? And to all of a sudden have to be stuck behind a camera and a laptop and trying to assess whether or not people are the right people for us has been. It's been a really interesting shift for us, and it's helped us review how we operate as a business as well, and how flexible and how scalable we can be through digital technology. But I guess that the greatest challenge is the trust factor, right? So when you meet people and you spend time with them, and you finish a day of workshops and end up going out for a bite to eat and some drinks, you really get to understand who people are, and you just can't do that now, right? I can't travel to Germany and spend a week with our new person on the ground there to really understand what makes them tick. I have to do this all via video.
Yeah. So what do you do then? Because you can't have that connection over brink at the end of the day. What are you putting in place as you put more boots on the ground and you move into more markets, as you create scale for your service business? It's like, what are the things you're doing differently now to be able to make up for what you can't?
Yeah, so I think there's very rational things that we have to do, particularly contractually. We have to make sure that we've got risk assessment clauses in their probation periods. Time enough for the people on the ground to get settled and do what we expect them to do, and succeed or not succeed, and de-risk our business, right? Because this is a financial investment as well as a human investment. But the other thing is spending more time talking. So while we can't be there for the whole day or for a week, or spend that kind of quality time, what we now do is we spend, I guess, more video content time during different parts of the day, so we can see people, early in the morning, first thing up, and how they operate kind of fresh for the day, and then at the end of the day, middle of the day, that sort of stuff. So we're trying to I guess, assess the humanity of it through, digital means, but also give us enough roadmap or runway to be able to, take time to assess. The other thing that we're doing is we're getting people to spend a lot more time with other people in the business, right? So some of our leaders across the offices, that they're all on calls to assess, the fit side of things, and for us, culture and humanness is most important, right? Obviously, there's lots of talent out there in the digital space, but how do we get the right fit for our business? Are they Overdose people?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the more remote you are, the harder you have to work at being human. It's a real proactive thing. Well, what's during this whole crisis? Then it's like we have a benefit of a little bit of hindsight now. 4 months, 5 months or so. What was the advice that you gave yourself at the start of this crisis that you think was most valuable now in hindsight?
It was an interesting. So my business partner and our CEO and I sat down, and we were 2 weeks in, right, and New Zealand was in lockdown. All of our other offices were going through various phases of that, and we did what I think everyone did during that period, which was to kind of freak out, right? We didn't know what was going to happen. We thought, all of the business was going to stop, and portions of our business did stop. But through that period, what we saw glimmers of brands and our client sets starting to think differently. And a lot of what our business is built on is that transformative approach to direct to consumer or business to business digital commerce.
Yeah.
And we started to see glimpses of the clients that we work with, and some new opportunities come our way that were like, now is our time to invest in change because we're forced to. And so at the end of that 2 weeks, Todd and I sat down, and Todd said, look, if we're going to do what we want to do, now is the absolute best time to go out there and start to accelerate. Good news stories are really positive, and people really flock to that. To be having conversations with businesses about growth in a time when everyone's thinking about holding or stabilizing or becoming slightly stagnant, was a really good conversation to have. And when you're talking positively in a challenging environment, it's quite infectious. So people really want to get in behind that as well. And so we made a very purposeful decision to double down. And that was kind of scary for us at the time, because it meant a bit of investment money-wise at a time when, potentially we were going to see a bit of a shortfall for a couple of months. But it's proven now, with hindsight, as you say, to be really effective. So we opened our New York office on April 1st. We've just hired our first chief data officer. We've just hired our first boots on the ground in Berlin. And we're about to bring back a new chief marketing officer as well, from the UK back to NZ. So during this time, it actually gave us more opportunity than it would have if we hadn't have been going through a pandemic, right? More people were open to opportunity.
So people are open to opportunity, but what else gave you the confidence to do the complete reverse of what logic would dictate and double down on growth at a time of uncertainty? Well, it's like, what did you see through there that gave you the confidence just to go for it?
I think if you look at a lot of the commentary around transformation, everyone's talking about the fact that we've seen 10 years of change happen in the space of 4 months, right? So that, we saw the flow of, or that the tidal change happen in commerce where traditional brands were going, look, we need to be in that space. And we're very well positioned as a kind of global commerce accelerator to help those brands, go through that transformation. And so that was a very good signal for us that, we weren't going to be, stuck kind of waiting. We were definitely at the forefront of that transformative approach. But the second thing was, I guess, a self-belief as well. So we've always, our business has been built on this foundation of accelerated growth, both for ourselves and for our clients. And if we were to stop, the momentum changes, right? And so a lot of our business is about momentum, forward motion. And so we decided that the signals were there for businesses globally to want to start that kind of accelerated transformation into commerce. And at the same time, we knew that we had to keep moving forward as well. So I guess a balance of self-belief and those kind of strong signals out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because plainly an awful lot has changed in the marketplace. Consumer behavior has been like radically turned upside down. You did, like as you said, you had this quantum move from bricks and mortar into a dependence on online. But more than that, it's actually about direct to consumer. It's not about online. It's about direct to consumer. So in terms of the lives of your customers through this as well, it's like what were they experiencing and how were they adapting to these challenges?
I think there were two types of customers, right? Two types of client sets. One was the type of business that went, hold on, there's a lot of change happening on, and we don't know what's going to happen, so we're going to pause, right? Businesses were shutting down marketing. They were kind of holding on to orders that they were placing with manufacturers. They were pausing and waiting. And then the flip of that were businesses that tried to make the most of every opportunity that was presented to them. So if you're a New Zealand business and you're going into level 1 lockdown and you can't trade anything, that was a time for some of our clients to go, okay, we can't trade, so we need to think about how we can set ourselves up for that moment of trade online. And when we went to to the next level, it was level 4 to level 3, and we could start to trade online, we saw phenomenal growth in those channels. We were seeing clients who in a month did 1,000% increase in terms of their online sales. Now that's never going to make up for a business that's got a network of bricks and mortar stores that were shut. But what it did is it gave a glimmer of insight into consumer behavior shifts, right? And the brands that looked at that and said, what are our consumers doing? How are they interacting with us differently? And what is it that we need to learn from that in order to set ourselves up for the future?
Yeah, so it comes back to listening and learning. So how do you use learning about what's actually changing even rapidly and use that to stop businesses getting paralyzed with fear? It's like, what's the trade-off here between certainty about where a market is going and the need to just get things done right now?
I think there's two parts to that. One is that rational, data-driven approach where you start to analyze and understand the consumer behavior and the activity that's going on from a data sense, and using that to paint a picture of what it could be in the future. Yeah. And then with that in mind, those hypotheses that you build out, starting to put them into practice, right? So that a lot of that's to do with speed. The second part of it is looking at that global shift of consumer behavior and going, we have to do this. Right? We don't have a choice if we're not actively pursuing a digitally centric strategy for our business and enabling us to interact with customers directly, then we're never going to make use of the opportunity that's being presented to us. We talk a lot about opportunities, but it's less about an opportunity. It's more about forced change, right? Yeah. And through forced change or what we call catalytic change, this is the type of change that sticks. Right. Often in these types of scenarios, and we saw it in the GFC, where people would hold, pause, wait, see what happens, maybe do a couple of shifts, but ultimately go back to the way that they were generally operating through that period. This has significantly changed the whole of the global landscape. And that type of catalytic change is the type of environment where you just must go through that process. If you don't, you're left behind. If you do, you have a chance.
So it's what you're saying, Paul, then, that actually a direct strategy is a mandatory now for any New Zealand business on the global stage?
I think so, because there's so much disruption that's gone through businesses. If you're a manufacturer and a wholesaler and a retailer, right, every part of your business has been disrupted. Literally ordering raw materials in order to make your products, let alone getting it moved from one part of the world to another part of the world, and then be able to get it in front of a consumer to purchase or in front of a business to wholesale into, is a challenge, right? So every single part of that whole ecosystem has been disrupted. And so without trying to fix everything, taking control of the things you can control has never been more important, right? So the one thing you can control is how you present yourself as a business, as a brand, to a prospective customer base, right? And so from our perspective, that direct model has never been more important, because it gives you both an opportunity to sell, but also an opportunity to learn and gain feedback, from a customer base.
And again, and build that learning into how you do it. You can do it, so you have to take action, but it can be iterative. I mean, it's like, I guess this must make, when we've gone, you're saying that we have to take action. You're saying that it is almost a mandatory now to be considering direct-to-consumer channels digitally through e-commerce or other marketing platforms across the globe. But it makes focus really difficult. It makes market selection really difficult. When I'm sitting here in West Auckland with my slippers on, wondering where to go, I might have one, wondering where to go in the world. It's like, so how does this paralysis of information start to become, paralysis of opportunity start to become a barrier to the speed of action that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is easy to get paralyzed and fearful of action, because not knowing where to point yourself can be, counterproductive in terms of moving forward. But if you're a business that has traditionally relied on some form of trade, either with businesses or with consumers, you don't have a choice, right? You have to do something, whether or not it's kind of starting up a new sales route through marketplaces like Amazon or say Tencent, or looking at new markets as an opportunity to launch into that. Obviously, when you're exporting, there is a whole bunch of logistical layers that you need to consider. But I think the change that we've seen in the global economy at the moment is pointing itself towards disruption within every layer of that, right? So whether or not you're looking at logistics partners like 3PLs or warehousing or shipping providers, every one of those types of businesses is being challenged and disrupted, and they all need to shift, right? So now's the time to start to have conversations with either new partners or existing partners. We've had conversations with NZ Post about how they're trying to evolve their shipping model to be more relevant for immediacy and consumer needs. But there's global shippers that are now looking at new ways of interacting directly with consumers to give them information that they didn't have before. So as a brand or as a manufacturer or as a business looking at different markets, I would start with research into that market. What is the market opportunity for you there? And NZTE provides some services in that space. We do a lot of analysis of digital interaction from consumers into those spaces. And that can provide us with a snapshot of the scale of the opportunity in terms of consumer base, the cost to present in front of those consumers, and the return opportunity that you should be able to get out of that market as well. So we often do that. I guess the three main markets that we look at would be the US, Asia, and Europe. And within that, there are specific places to play as well. So within the US, obviously the West Coast is a lot closer. So therefore proximity makes it a bit easier to get products there. Landing on the West Coast versus landing on the East Coast is a lot easier. Looking at Europe, the different regional areas within Europe, so Benelux or DACH or into the UK, they all provide their own unique opportunities and also own unique consumer bases as well. So we have the opportunity, or we have the potential, to look at those markets and assess the relevance of brands for that market, whether there's demand for that, or whether it's actually too risky to go into that market.
It's really interesting when I hear you describe the way that you see the world. You're seeing not individual towns and regions, but actually but seeing vast chunks of the globe. It's almost as if when we're talking about direct to consumer, that a choice of platform is almost a market choice in itself sometimes. So it's like, I'm going to Amazon as opposed to I'm going to the US. How on earth do you prioritize the need for the insight that comes from knowing your customer to create that product market fits perfectly with the convenience or the needs of the mega platforms like a Tencent or your Amazons. What comes first, the country you're selling into, the market you're selling into, or the marketplace that you're going to use as functionality?
I think what comes first is understanding what the business needs, right? So if you're in a position where you have a massive abundance of stock, then you've got a volume challenge, right? You need to sell lots of product. In fact, at that stage, you probably care less about who the customer is and more about how you can get a lot of products sold in a short period of time. And marketplaces like Amazon are perfect for that, right? Because what they do is they give you a captive audience who are looking to buy all of the time, right? And so to be able to put your product into that mix, understand, there's nuances of platforms, so algorithms and how they work, how to promote product properly within those platforms. But what they do deliver is, a consumer base that is ready to buy, right? What you don't get from that is consumer understanding, right? You don't typically own that customer.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to give you the feedback loop that you potentially need to be able to evolve and be relevant for this new digital space that we play in. So if it's a volume game, that's where you'd want to start, I think. And there's some very good support networks in New Zealand to help brands activate in those marketplace environments. But if you're a business that is looking to extend your sales channels from wholesale through to kind of retail networks, through to your own direct to consumer, then you're looking at commerce platforms that allow you to scale globally. You're looking at insight and data analysis to understand who that customer is in that market and whether or not they've got a penchant for product or service. And in that sense, that's kind of the space that we play in most often, is helping brands understand exactly what their consumer base looks like in those markets.
Yeah, and this is understanding that consumer base is critical, because if what you're describing here is fundamentally a shift to the very model at the heart of your business, it's gone from a physical one to a virtual one, giving away that customer by just using the big marketplaces, the mega platforms, isn't strengthening your business, it's actually weakening it. So it's the elements that we've been talking about significantly, like just selling volume is not enough. If you're pivoting your entire business model, you've also got to bring the elements that drive long-term sustainable value as well. So it's like there's been lots of conversation in recent weeks with New Zealand businesses about the need to increase the customer experience online, to look beyond convenience of digital and direct to consumer channels and actually start to bring some magic and put some value back, so it's not a race to the bottom. So when we're looking at that service layer, it's like, how should we approach this when we're looking at an export market, when we can't control every touch points? We can't control our 3PL in the same way. How should we think about building service into that customer experience and the value when we don't have physical control over every element of it for export markets?
I mean, I think it's an interesting model to understand the complementary nature of marketplace selling versus direct to consumer, where you own the customer. A lot of brands who have managed to succeed in global markets will do it through a sustainable volume-based sell through, say, marketplaces like Amazon, right? And what that does is it gives you the foundational stability to allow you then to evolve your brand, not exclusively, but complementary into a direct-to-consumer space. The reason that I think kind of having that stability through marketplaces is good is it allows you the flexibility to win and potentially lose in the direct-to-consumer space, but not risk your kind of, your volume sales channel as well. And in that sense, what we look to do is take the heart and soul and humanity of brands and translate that into a direct-to-consumer model. Because the one thing that this great change has brought about is a much larger amount of competition in that digital direct-to-consumer space, right? More and more consumers are shopping online, whether it's groceries or food services or, liquor or skincare or whatever. They're more used to and more hungry to trial and buy product online. Where the competition now comes in is, why would a brand, why would a consumer choose brand A versus brand B, right? And that comes down to a couple of things. What's the purpose of the brand? What do they stand for? Can I find affinity with that brand? And I think more and more brand intent is going to be more powerful in that space. But the second part of that, and I think this is where the competition is going to really hot up, is that service layer, how I ship product to you, what are your returns processes, what's your free shipping, how can I buy repeat purchases from you, how do you recognize me as a customer and value my custom with you versus another brand that may or may not know who I am. And so those kind of more EQ or emotional layers are going to be as important as that kind of IQ rational, price, product and promotion layer as well.
So are you advocating here, Paul, for almost reimagining what that service layer should be from the perfect online to real world experience? But thinking beyond the mega platforms and what we've been taught to expect from them into something which is more intuitive and more human?
Yeah, I think the humanity of it is really important, right? So what we've seen is as brands have shifted a lot of sales to online, it's really put a stress on the infrastructure that supports that. So things like shipping delays have been quite phenomenal, right? Where you would normally get a product shipped internationally and to your doorstep in 5 days, it now takes 15 working days, right? And people will forgive that because they understand the nature of the change in the global economy. Where brands and businesses will succeed in that space is where they can affect change to that and communicate well with clients and build up empathy above and beyond the kind of status quo, right? And so where I think New Zealand has such a massive advantage is, as a nation, we still go back to the fundamentals of why businesses start, right? A lot of it is about the passion that sits behind, whether you're making products or whether you're a fashion business or a skincare business, right? Actually, there's purpose behind why these businesses have started, right? They're often founded by people who have a deep drive to succeed in that business. How we start to portray that outwards into a global economy is going to be really powerful. I think that layered with the New Zealand story that's been phenomenally reported globally, that can only help New Zealand brands, and importantly, the value of the New Zealand brand or the New Zealand story that sits on top of that gives us a gateway or a wedge that we can then drive into those new markets and leverage as well. It's kind of like when 100% Pure first came out, right? It was a great soapbox for people to stand on and sell through. So now we've got the same thing happening.
Yeah, so inside this process of moving beyond, if I can paraphrase your words, of moving beyond transaction in a direct-to-consumer environment to one that's actually building emotion. It's about provenance, it's about service, but ultimately about having the confidence to transact, to buy, and the desire to build a relationship for the long term. Is there a risk with this that we start to make our operations cookie cutter, that we believe that we know what the service structure should be like, and we replicate the wrong service structure in the wrong market? We forget the fact that the world is one planet, but is fundamentally different in what we expect. Can our own enthusiasm for being Kiwis actually get in our way here and maybe miss the mark?
I would say that was actually the case, previous to COVID. I think there was a very, very much a cookie cutter approach, right? There was a way of doing things in order to launch into the US and a way of doing things to launch into the UK.
Yeah.
And now that whole approach has been, turned upside down. And so we actually have, I guess we have more responsibility now to be more relevant, right? So we can't just rely on the standard trade routes, and we can't just rely on, the fact that there's an open market, wanting to buy men's shirts or skin serums, right? What we now have to do is understand the demand in there and the I guess the desire for people to have access, to brands and products and customer service via digital channels, right? So you can now be a brand that ships from New Zealand to international markets. Let's disregard the cost of that at the moment, And people are more willing to wait for something they believe in than they are for something that is, cheap and fast, I think.
So are you saying that our geographical location in this cozy corner of the world is actually a benefit when it comes to building confidence?
I think it's a benefit in the way that we have been able to deal with this pandemic, because what it does is it breeds confidence in our economy and in our ability as a nation to manage through these. And so that's a good foundation to have conversations with consumers. Not that you'd talk directly about that, but it's the permission that allows us to get in front of consumers. I think what we have on top of that is we have the right type of provenance story to be able to cut through a more and more competitive and noisier kind of landscape. And it allows us to then test propositions and test hypotheses in those markets without having to commit 100% to the logistical infrastructure that you need in order to deliver volume in those spaces.
So we're getting back to the principle of designing for the behaviour of the particular market and that consumer, as opposed to designing for yourself.
Yeah, so similar to our business at the moment, right? We have a blueprint for the way that our business operates. That's founded in New Zealand, and we're constantly evolving that blueprint and then taking the best of it to put into the other markets that we're in. But we can't expect what we do in New Zealand to be 100% relevant to the US or to Germany or to Ireland or Singapore. So what we need local people on the ground who understand who we are and believe in the principles behind it, but translate that into local context, right? And it's the same for brands. You can't expect to be perceived and received in the same way by everyone globally. You have to find your nuances and what drives you, and then translate that into that local context to be relevant.
You do seem to be tackling one of the paradoxes here of the global local balance by doing this, but and challenging us to think about not exporting our products, but about exporting ourselves as well. If we can be global and local, and people can want to buy from us because we're here, not just because we're convenient as well, then there must be a whole lot more value that we can create by working specifically through these channels to try to build bigger, more sustainable customer bases over time. It's like how on this journey of exporting yourself and exporting New Zealand, is it possible to invest? Cool.
Back.
We are back. Sorry, Paul, we lost you there. You made my heart stop just for a minute there. It's the first time that anyone's just had enough of an interview and just pressed. But what I was saying is that in this is like you're saying that there is a need, like you're dealing with a big paradox of global versus local. It's the fact that people need both. They need to have something localized to them, but also they're hungry for the connections with overseas markets because they're attributing the values that they want to the values of New Zealand and the values of that brand. And you're challenging us to export ourselves as part of that as well. Not just the physical product. Don't just put products on a ship. It's like build that channel and export yourself, because that's part of it. When we're thinking about this strategy, which is fundamentally different to how we've approached it before, what are the first steps we should think about building that infrastructure that enables us to be able to replicate what people want from us being in New Zealand with that need for that local infrastructure, that local nuance? How do we start to build that insight to be able to put plans in place?
We talk about it as a translation issue, right? How do you translate who you are into a local context, right? Whether it's language, whether it's geography, whether it's seasonal. And a lot of businesses have got the fundamentals of that right. Particularly where you're a seasonal business where, your products rely on, whether it's summer or winter, a lot of brands are understanding how to manufacture and how to ship for those, changes in hemisphere and seasonal changes as well. I think the next layer is how do you understand, what the local consumer colloquialisms are, right? How people talk about brands and products, or, whether or not, if you're in the north of the US or the south of the US, right? So that kind of summer, winter, seasonal, atmospheric, those sorts of things. What do they do to drive change in terms of consumer behavior? So we have some very kind of functional ways of doing that. Understanding search intent is a really easy way of kind of diving into what those local, hyper local consumer bases are really looking for.
Yeah.
And then helping, translating your brand into that consumer intent then becomes a lot easier, right? And it could be as simple as things like kind of core keywords or key phrases that make more sense for that audience than they would for another audience, for example. And that can shift. If you're in the US, you've got 52 states and, very, very different climates in all of those states, across the board, from political to economic to, geographic. So helping, finding ways to source data and insights that can drive that understanding of who that customer is and what they need and what they're looking for. That's a really strong way of starting to help understand, how you translate your brand into that relevance.
So if we understand this correctly, then the principles of exporting remain the same. It's understand the market, understand the needs, find that hyper niche, because there's a cheeky niche for everybody, no matter what you're selling somewhere in the world. But you're advocating revolution in how we build the end-to-end customer experience online. You're advocating that we iterate and we build based upon real feedback through our channels, that we own as much of those customers as we possibly can, and that we take the best of what is global connection and global connection and local nuance to be able to build the strongest possible relationship. It's kind of, this feels that there's a lot of learning that we have to do as an export community around digital, to stop taking it for granted. Where should we be reaching out at the moment to try to get our heads around this as exporters, to work out what we have to do differently inside our business?
So I think, the first part of that is understanding that the role of your digital channels, whether it's your commerce site or whether it's your email marketing or your paid media, has to be considered as a new and different space, rather than just a digital replication of your physical, right? And through that understanding, it then becomes an imperative to start to treat it in and of itself, right? And the second thing is working with partners who can help you see behind the curtain, right? Help to surface the information that isn't just reports that consultancies are writing or partners who are trying to sell the same thing over and over again, right? So it's about it still comes back to that reason why, right? So every brand is different, regardless of the fact if you sell a white shirt with a different label on it, there's still a rationale or a reason or a humanity behind what you do. So in the same context, you need partners who understand that and can help shape the questions that you need to ask of those new markets in different ways for you, right? But I still think that infrastructure will ultimately be the same, right? Those trade routes, the logistics, the way of getting products there, but the way that you actually get a product to a consumer will change.
Yeah. Do you think we're prepared enough as a business community here in New Zealand for the enormity of this challenge that's up ahead of us, in terms of the necessary transformation into direct channels, from bricks and mortar into online?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you use the word enormity, because we look at it and think it's not that enormous. We think that there's ways of doing it that are far less risky and far more considered. And with that, it does take away that, that enormity of the challenge. But I think, I think we're in a stage in, kind of the evolution of this that forces brands to start to think in this space, right? It's going to happen, and you either decide to do it now or you decide to do it in the future. Challenge with waiting is, being left behind. So there are opportunities to do this in a relatively cost-effective way and a relatively risk-free way. And I'd suggest that, as a business, when you're looking at your financial layers, it's understanding, kind of what your investment in new channels needs to be, and talking with partners who can help you shape that, right?
Yeah. So when we're going back and we were talking to our executives, to our boards, and to our investors and our shareholders about why we need to throw more money into this, what are it's like where should we start the conversation about transformation? Where should we be drawing the attention of our supporters and our investors to make sure that we're capitalized to be able to do this properly?
I think there's two motivations for this, right? One is loss of revenue. So boards dislike going backwards. And so there's a relatively straightforward conversation to say, in order to mitigate the shortfalls here, we need to invest here in order to capitalize on this growth opportunity, right? So a lot of brands are seeing, significant growth in their online channels, not significant enough to make up the whole of, say, a bricks and mortar space, but enough to be a hook for a board to go, yeah, actually we can see the potential, right? The other side of that coin is where brands have been either relatively new in that space and have got a sustainable channel through, sustainable digital channel through, say, a marketplace like Amazon, and now are in a position where they've got a strong foundation that will allow them to then play direct to consumer. Now, how they do that is entirely different to how they do it through a marketplace, right? A marketplace is really about working the algorithm in order to get your product on the first page and at a price point that matches or mitigates the competition around you, right? When we're talking direct to consumer, it's less about price and promotion, although that plays a big part. And depending on the time of year, you have to play in that space. But it's as much about how you start to surface the benefits alongside the features, if that, going back to some simple kind of economic structures.
Yeah, totally. So on this, I mean, this is going to be, this is a momentous year for everybody. This is the year where 10 years have been rolled into 4 months, pretty much.
Absolutely.
Transformation. It's like, just with your Pritchard crystal ball here, looking into it, then what's the next 6 months hold for us around this trend? Is it just going to keep larger? What should we be expecting and watching out for?
So, our perspective for the next 6 months is we will see a staggered effect, right? We'll see businesses that will hold, we'll see businesses that will fast follow, and we'll see leaders that will grow into that space, right? Pretty typical way of change happening. What the big difference at this time is the compressed amount of space that people have to play in this, right? With this huge consumer shift to online purchasing, it's also forcing lots more competition into that space as well, right? So how you stand out is going to become more and more important, right? Or if you choose not to do that, how you then supplement the lost opportunity through other means, right? Whether it's diversification of products or moving into adjacent verticals, or there's lots and lots of different ways to kind of mitigate that. For us, what we're proposing to a lot of our clients is to dip toes into markets, right? To see what the effect is, to test propositions, to test consumer benefits, and to get products into people's hands, right? If you're a startup or you're an established brand in one country and you're trying to start up in a new country, you have to have that startup mindset, right? You can't just rely on who you are and what you do in one place and expect it to be replicable into a new place. So being in that mindset of, I've got a foundation and a stability here, but I'm still willing to hustle and grow into this other space, and I need to bring that mindset, is going to be more powerful than going, right, in order to be successful, I need to kind of pick up exactly what I've got here and replicate it in that market, right? Cost, infrastructure, time, all these things are against you in that space.
This is fascinating, because if I understand you correctly, in 6 months we're going to be looking at more competition, more brands in the same space, which means that we have to adapt to deal with that competition, be that through diversification or innovation or price or value structures, whatever. But what you're telling us right now, again, if I understand you correctly, Paul, is that we have to change. It's our attitude, our ability to drive our business in a way that is listening and is reactive to the market's needs that's going to enable us to get through. It comes down to the human beings behind the business that drive the success.
Absolutely. And I think, if you've been doing what you've been doing for, say, 7 years, right, and it's been successful and you've built out a, financially stable business that's doing its kind of 20% year-on-year growth, right, and you are looking for new ways to accelerate, you can't keep doing the same thing. But what you do have is you have what that kind of purpose that you had when you started it up, right? So taking that, that ethos, that kind of emotional mindset, and then focusing that towards a new way of operating, I think, what got you to where you are, right? That initial genesis of it can help you get to a new place as well, right? Yeah. A lot of it is about, we call it hustle. A lot of it's about kind of startup mindsets. It's kind of that 0 to 1 mentality. But if you take that approach, the way that Overdose operates is, for every market that is starting up, there's another one behind it that is into its second or third year, right? So we have the stability behind to support, and then we're extending that out into a new market or a new country or a new office that has the backing of that more stable operation. And what that does is it allows us to risk kind of a startup mentality, right? So one person or a small team on the ground who are there just literally to crack open the door and bring the brand to life, right, in that market. But they've got the backing of the rest of the business behind them, right? So it's relatively risk-free. Our investment is, is probably 6 months of a salary of a human, and, probably, close to 100 grand of marketing, right? And that's minimal risk for us, because what we've got behind it is we've got the infrastructure to be able to deliver on any promise that person on the ground has, right? And similarly for a brand, right, when you go into a new market, don't go in full noise, right? Don't drop kind of your whole range in there. If you've got 100 products, drop your 10 best sellers.
Yeah.
Right? Find ways to be fast and agile in a way that you typically aren't now, right? So go back to what you originally did in order to get up and running.
Yeah, it's actually slimming down to just what's essential for you to create that market fit.
Exactly.
So if you're going back, just as a final thought for today, if there was a bit of advice that you wish you had at the start of this, when you were finding your first market, your second market, your third market, what do you wish that somebody had told you?
Do some due diligence. Don't just go in. Don't just go in all guns blazing.
Hire a lawyer.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's funny, eh? Lawyers just end up costing you a lot of money, but they do some pretty good things for you. Yeah, look, I think for us it was, we made mistakes with human beings, right? That's probably the biggest lesson that we learned. Was, there's two parts to assessing a situation, right? One is the rational part, the numbers, all that sort of stuff. The other thing is just your gut, right? And sometimes your gut is telling you a thing that the numbers aren't, right? It just doesn't feel right. And often you have to listen to that. And we often didn't. We would look at the rational and go, right, this person or this client opportunity on paper is the right thing. But there's something that niggles in the back of your mind that just goes, but it just doesn't feel right. That person, hasn't been as responsive, or, they've kind of talked around this single point here. And that's, that actually is more important than what we gave it credit for. So I guess what we do now is we do a lot more due diligence, right? A lot more research, a lot more investigation into either human beings or kind of market opportunities or, acquisition potentials that we've got.
It does sound like you're taking your own advice now. Is that?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Yeah, well, it's like a builder's house, right? Often you can give the advice, but you're not living the advice. So we've definitely been inwards looking and gone, we have to trust ourselves a lot more, but we also have to do the work, right?
It's fascinating how even in talking in conversation about digital here is actually about human beings at the end of the day, and the reliance.
It always is, right?
Yeah.
It always is. Our business relies on human interaction, right? On building trust.
Yeah.
And I think brands, absolutely rely on building trust, right? So creating that kind of human layer, right? That service layer, that reason to buy, is super important.
It's been a really inspiring conversation. It's like you've gone out there as a service business. So any service businesses watching this, just double down. Just make sure you got it. Just put one, like just this is the time when disruption's happening and markets are being reset. So it's actually a time to scale, not a time to retrench. But also, I think what's particularly fascinating here is how the way that we've been perceiving direct to consumer as being, for some markets, not for all, needs to be reconsidered inside our businesses. Paul, you've been amazing through all of this. You've jumped on a couple of webinars in the height of the lockdown and helped us to understand what's going on. And it's been great to have some more time to chat today. If we could keep gassing, maybe we will get you back before too long, and maybe do it over beverage next time as well. I think
looking forward to that.
Long overdue. But mate, thank you so much again for your time and for your insight on behalf of everybody watching here and all the crew. It's been a pleasure having you with us, and we look forward to catching you very soon.
Cheers.
All right, cheers. Thank you, Paul. Awesome.